I'm recording.
You ready?
I'm ready.
All right.
That should.
Welcome back to Prison Talk with Jamie Meade, and
I'm at Charleston.
this is part 2 of the episode on rehabilitation and education inside the prison system, specifically the Michigan Department of Correction. And what was when we left off the first call, what was the...
Yes. Well, I asked you to explain what criminal justice was, criminology and criminological psychology. And I said you have to explain it. I have trouble. And I'm also keeping that in because I think that's a really good juxtaposition of the difference between us and how you're a very educated human being, Jamie, sitting inside a prison, and I have access to a lot of information, and I can't even pronounce that word, let alone anything else. So explain that, and then we'll get into the episode.
Now, I want to say there's only 1 or 2 schools in the United States that has even developed a degree, a graduate degree or a PhD on criminological psychology. It came out of Canada, and it's early for our listeners. It's 7 o'clock in the morning or 7:15, somewhere around there here where I'm at, and it's late at night where Emma's at. So I don't have enough coffee in me to remember the one that coined or wrote the first book on it. But it combines the psychological aspects of developing thinking patterns, or through learning theories. They focus on a lot of what children learn when they're growing up and the habits they develop. And I always like to compare it to like a football player. A football player in the NFL, the National Football League, goes from the East Coast to the West Coast, and they run completely different formations on offense. And the player has to relearn, because he's been playing on the East Coast for so long, the West Coast offensive plays and the different forms that they use.
Yeah.
And he's developed that pattern of a second nature of running East Coast patterns. And that is like criminality. We have developed over time so long that it becomes second nature in thinking pattern. If we think out of those patterns, to us that is abnormal thinking. It's irrational. But to normal people, all of our thinking patterns are abnormal and irrational. So they try to focus on specifically that development and how that develops and how it can change. And now with the adolescent brain development becoming forefront in the criminal justice system, this can shed light on how easy it is for youth to develop. And wasn't it, I want to say Skinner, the psychologist, who kept his daughter, he was criticized for it or something, he kept his daughter in isolation more and taught her certain things. She became a great psychologist, but he did it to show that you could specifically train a child from young age to that point in their life by only placing them in a situation where the experience that they receive is that of whatever you want them to learn. In developing these patterns.
That is very disturbing. That might be a groundbreaking experiment in evidence, but that is a very disturbing parenting technique. But then again, I suppose.
Oh yeah.
I suppose.
I believe it was Skinner.
I suppose all parents do that to some degree, but Jesus Christ.
Yeah, I mean it's.
I mean, let's all take a moment. No wonder she became a psychologist.
Well, I mean, if we look at Sigmund Freud and his reliance on the id and everything, he always thought that it's a man's something with his mother.
Yes.
So it was never,
yes.
So those were thinking of psychologists.
I would,
of that
perhaps
time.
that was some projection on his part.
Yeah.
He was very obsessed with that, wasn't
And
he?
it could have been. But then there's other, and I look at Stanley Sam now, and his last name is, anyone can look him up, he's still alive, Samenow, and his first name is Stanton. And he came out of the University of Michigan, and he was called out to Washington, D.C. to a asylum for the criminally insane. And he studied under Yokelson, who had passed away before his books were published. And he has a 3-volume set of books titled The Criminal Personality. And he lists, like, I want to say 57 or 64, somewhere around there, thinking errors that criminals have. Well, Glenn Walters, who was a former psychologist for the Federal Bureau of Prisons, took those thinking errors, and I think he grabbed up 10 major ones that all criminals have. And he wrote Criminal Lifestyle. I believe that's his book. And he's still alive. These are, they've studied criminals for all their lives. And initially, Sam now thought that criminally insane was they were actually insane, but then he realized that criminals are not insane. In order to commit a crime, you have to formulate an intent. And a truly insane person cannot formulate that intent. So then they even got into epilepsy possibly could cause someone to commit a crime, and they were looking at different biological aspects of the brain also. But Sam now admits in his books, and his books were written in the 70s or late 60s, but he had a few decades of studies of criminals, and he admitted that there's a small percentage that truly change. And he said a person can only fake that they have been rehabilitated. The longest he's seen someone fake it and get away with it was about 7 years. They always resort back and do something where they get caught. So that's a.
Well, you're always going on. You're always going on about thinking errors and abnormal thinking.
Yes.
So now.
And those what abnormal thinking can be, it doesn't have to be criminal.
No.
And that distinguishes it from.
But what I'm getting at, Jamie, is
abnormal.
I think that particular class or those classes around that idea, I think you obviously really took that in, because that is something I hear you talk about a lot. Yeah.
Because there's one of the leading criminologists. I really love his work, is Edwin Sutherland, and he developed differential association theory, and it's a learned theory, and he hypothesized that most criminals, majority of them, learn from their peers and learn from their environment. And that's how they develop, even by watching their peers. A peer might not tell them exactly how to do it, but by observation, that they can, learn how to commit crime.
Well, that stands.
And they adapt those.
That seems completely real. That's how children learn things. That's how everybody learns things. Yeah.
And he used that as a way of looking towards why people commit crime. And there's a variety of
reasons,
theories on how people get to committing a crime, and it's a spectrum, because we're always talking about the spectrum of black to white, and there are gray areas. Some, mine, I recognized excitability. I was extremely impulsive. I was influenced by peers and community, and the lure of money and importance, the sense of self-worth being a drug dealer and a gang member pushed me into that area, or pulled me into that area, I should say. And the key point to that is that you got to accept that.
Yes.
And once you accept that, that's when you start developing those thinking patterns that become ingrained. And then that's how you have to break it. You have to replace those irrational thinking with rational thinking.
And would you say, because I'm assuming you wouldn't have come to any of these conclusions without that education?
No, I would not have, because it sparked. What I learned was I was not nickel slick, like the term that's used. I didn't invent the wheel. I was doing patterns that have been researched and studied for years.
Yeah.
Decades.
Yeah.
From the 18...
You completely went out. Pattern. You completely went out from the 18 when?
Well, it'd be considered the 1900s. I think, I can't even remember how to pronounce his name. Beccaria. He's one of the oldest criminologists recognized, and he wrote criminal. It's like Beccario or something like that.
Beccario.
Yeah, it's a weird spelling. He's Italian.
Well, then I'm going to go for Beccario. I'm going to show my complete ignorance and vote Beccario.
But so those are, they're just different ways of how we get to committing, actually being able to make that decision. And getting
back to education, and rehabilitation. That's actually a prime example of how your education helped you towards your personal rehabilitation, because it sounds to me, talking to you a lot, I know you use, especially thinking patterns, you're always going on about that in some way, shape or form. And obviously learning that has really stuck in your mind, and then you have actively chosen to rehabilitate yourself, essentially.
Yes. And we also started a group of us with the same interest, also started running classes like criminal addictive thinking classes. We started running commitment to change classes. And without staff sitting inside the classroom, prisoners as a whole, peer to peer, we're more open to discussing actually what drove us to commit crime.
Yeah.
So you have a little bit more openness when you have a group of prisoners doing it instead of when you have a staff member sitting in there.
Well, it's when you're with people that you know, or hope at least, won't judge you and understand what you're talking about, where you're coming from.
And, so when it comes to understanding and looking at why you committed crime, it's a lot deeper than that, because the person who commits a homicide, a murder, can have the same...
You have 1 minute remaining.
Same intent that drives him can drive the rapist.
Yeah.
It's the sense of control, power, dominance over someone.
Yeah.
It might not always, it could be the same that a robber or a thief has.
Yeah.
But we are rounding to the last minute on this phone call. Are we going to continue this discussion on the third?
We are, unless you've said all you have to say on the matter.
No, because I would like to get into how the MDOC attempted to block us getting these books and learning about ourselves.
Well, I was going to ask you about the library if you have access to it, but you know what? I will let you do most of, if not all, the talking next episode.
All right. And I will call you back in 15 minutes. And I hope all the listeners come back and listen to this part 3. We will wrap it up on part 3.
All righty. Bye.
All right. Bye-bye.